Happy Friday, everybody. I am your guest host, Christina Long, filling in for Matt Jones, who is covering some Razorback baseball right now as we're recording. Those game times for baseball and softball got moved up because of the weather, which I personally am in support of because it clears the deck for gymnastics. I would not be me if I did not mention gymnastics. Our producer, Sydney, was also excited to have a little bit of gymnastics talk. They're trying to break the NCAA attendance record tonight in their meet against Oklahoma. They're going to start at 7:30. They say get there by 7:15 for all the pre-meet hype stuff as well. So it should be really fun. Oklahoma is the top-ranked team in the country, defending national champion. The attendance record they're trying to break is over 16,000 people. So it is a huge goal for them, and we'll see if they can get to it. But had to talk a little bit about gymnastics since I cover them over there. So Anthony Christensen is joining us now from Columbia, Missouri, where he is there to cover Arkansas basketball's game against the Tigers tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit about that game and a little bit about the SEC tournament picture. Anthony's joining us from free advertising, the best brewery in Columbia, Missouri, Logboat.
That's
Anthony,
right.
I'm
The
glad
best brewery around.
I'm glad we're doing this now because I need to remind you to please bring me home a 6-pack of Shipheads so that I can just relive college briefly.
Got it. You've got it. I'll bring myself like 6 too. So
Perfect. Just buy whatever they have and just bring it back. You drove. You've got room in the car.
I've got plenty of room in the car. Yes.
So
No, the best place around.
before you headed over to Logboat, you were listening to Dennis Gates's pregame press conference. So what did Coach Gates have to say? This is a quick turnaround. You know, they played Missouri not too long ago. Arkansas did and won that game, obviously, here at Bud Walton Arena. What did Dennis Gates have to say about this second iteration of this matchup?
Yeah, he talked a lot about how the last game there were just a lot of thin margins. I mean, you mentioned the second chance points. Arkansas just barely outdid Missouri in that category. Points in transition, stuff like that. So trying to just sharpen up the finer details from the Missouri angle of things is kind of what he talked about. I asked him about Darius Acuff and how would you even try to prepare to guard him, and he compared him a lot to Chris Paul when Chris Paul was in college, and so yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff. He harped on some of the non-game kind of events of tomorrow's game day, with it being senior day for Mark Mitchell and Sean Phillips and a lot of those guys. And yeah, I think those were the biggest things. But with regard to the game, it was a lot of talk about limiting, or I guess cleaning up some of the finer details. Like, I mean, Missouri only had 10 turnovers against Arkansas, but 6 of those were from the point guards, so they're going to want to clean that up. So stuff like that. And he was very complimentary of how difficult of a place Bud Walton is to go and play, and credited some of that to that, being in that road environment. So yeah, that's kind of the main things he talked about. And and then Mark Mitchell kind of came in and kind of touched on a lot of the same stuff. So so that was the press conference.
You talked a little bit, you and I did, off microphone about you putting Missouri in your AP ballot and not feeling great about it because of the way that
And
kind
then
of
they lost to Oklahoma.
Did they? I didn't even know. Didn't even see that. That's so funny. I remember talking to you a little bit earlier in the week about how that, what was it, like 20 to 25 range was just hard because of
it was
the
just
losses
ridiculous because everybody lost and everybody stinks.
But somebody's got to be 20 to 25. You got to fill the ranking out somehow.
You can't turn in your ballot with only 20 teams ranked, unfortunately. So, but I put Missouri in because it had won 6 of 8 games and it looked really good, beaten some really good teams as well. And, it was between Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, St. Louis, kind of all in that range of teams I was considering. And I went with Missouri, Tennessee, and St. Louis because Missouri had beaten Tennessee that week. Tennessee had already had 20 plus wins, even though it had lost twice to Kentucky. Kentucky only had the 19 wins. So I wanted to reward Tennessee for having more overall wins. And then I kept St. Louis at 25 because if I had dropped St. Louis out, it would have been the only 3-loss team with 3 or fewer losses in the country that would not have been on my ballot. And I felt that the overall body of work was worth rewarding. And then since then, Tennessee has won. Good work, Volunteers. Missouri lost to Oklahoma. PU. and St. Louis has won its games as well. So I guess, and then Kentucky lost to who did Kentucky lose to? Kentucky lost is the important thing to note. So I think I did what I could
Yeah.
with that range,
Yeah.
but it was tough because all of the teams I was going to vote for over those teams also lost. UCF, Belmont, a lot of just so many teams. Vanderbilt lost 2 games, but it was just nobody wanted to be ranked.
Everyone just nobody look at us, get us out of here. I wanted to ask you, you've written a couple times about how John Calipari has talked about Dennis Gates, and I believe it's Sean Miller too, about them being guys that have done a great job this year coaching in the SEC and just getting through what they've been given. And what do you think about the job that Dennis Gates has done this year? Because they've had a lot of ups and downs since he's been there. That first year they really popped, then they took that huge step back. This year it seems like they've fought through a little bit. What do you kind of make of the job he's done overall, and then also this year? And why do you think John Calipari thinks so highly of him?
Yeah, I think it's just because you look at Missouri's non-conference. It was a lot of teams that, no disrespect intended, just really didn't have a pulse, and then lost to 3 of the 4 teams that they played that were rated inside KenPom's top 100, and 2 of those lost. They lost 3 of those 4, and 2 of those losses were by 20 plus points, and the one win was Minnesota, and it's like, so you look at all of that, and it was a really the non-conference resume for Missouri was, and still kind of is, non-existent. That's why Missouri's still kind of on the bubble, but kind of on the right side of the bubble, is because they didn't have anything of note in the non-conference. But then you kind of peel back the layers a little bit. Jaden Stone was out for most of the non-conference play, as was Trent Pierce, and getting those guys back, they go on a little bit of a run. They beat Kentucky, they beat Florida, and really got off to a really nice start in SEC play. They're only one of 2 teams in conference play to have beaten Florida, which is a testament to that game individually, but also just kind of having those guys back. And when you have a non-conference slate with which that Missouri had, it can be easy to get into conference play and see just how much ground you have to make up to get into the tournament picture, and kind of be daunted by that. And to Dennis Gates' credit, to Missouri's credit, they haven't, and they've worked themselves onto the right side of the bubble. Now, if the bubble was any stronger, which the bubble stinks, would that be the case? I'm not sure, but Missouri's best wins, Florida, Kentucky on the road, a lot of these SEC games are better than a lot of the bubble teams, the other bubble teams have. So they're in a good position to get there, and I think that's probably the big reason why you're seeing a lot of people talk about the job Dennis Gates has done this season, because obviously you and I both went to Mizzou. We have friends who who still cover Mizzou. Probably not go to Mizzou. We're all old now, but so we see our friends work, and we see we read what they write and all that, and you get a good, I guess, idea of how the season is going beyond just watching the games, and you begin to appreciate just the job that they've done this season. And I think that's the turnaround job, I think, is one of Dennis Gates's better jobs throughout his 4-year tenure at Missouri. Obviously year 2 was kind of, I guess, a wash, if you will, just how bad that kind of went. But you look at year 1 and year 3, and Missouri was good in both those years, and is decent this year. So I think that's probably where you, I guess, look just in terms of the job this year and just kind of the job overall. And I think that's why you see John Calipari say all of the things that he said about the job Dennis Gates has done for this season, especially in particular.
Arkansas won the last matchup against Missouri 94-86. What do you think Arkansas can learn from that game? What do you think Missouri could learn from that game that could make them, if they are going to give Arkansas a scare here? And do you think Arkansas is going to be just fine in this game, or how do you think this one's going to go?
Yeah, so I think the first thing it goes back to those kind of fine margins. They're really tight. It was a tight game for a lot of it. Dennis Gates talked a little bit about how the first half ended, and just how much that kind of shifted things, because that was pretty back and forth before. I think it was a 16-4 run or something like that to end the first half for Arkansas to go into halftime with the lead. I'm not certain that was the exact number, but there was some sort of run, and it came without Darius Acup on the floor. So that was a big shift in the game for Arkansas's favor. So I think a lot of it is for both teams kind of making sure that they're the ones kind of taking care of those finer details. For Arkansas, I think it also comes down to and it seems like every time we hop on a podcast, whether it's you or Matt or Ethan or whoever, it always comes to the front court and handling the physicality and the size. Missouri is one of the biggest, if not the biggest team in the SEC, and Arkansas has had its inconsistencies with front court play this season. Front court played well last time against Missouri. Can they do that again? Out rebounded Missouri, outscored Missouri in the paint, and that's a big feat when you think about Mark Mitchell in particular, and also Sean Phillips and the guys who can get driving to the paint. So those are, I think, the biggest things that you kind of see when you look at this matchup is just kind of they're kind of it kind of comes down to those finer details of making sure that you're not the team that ends up with 3 more turnovers than the other, or more points in the paint, out rebounding the other side by 2 or 3, whatever it may be. This is kind of one of those games that it comes down to those finer details, and I think that's what both teams are definitely going to be harping on. And I think it'll be an entertaining game. I think it'll be I think it'll be a lot of fun to be at. Just from an atmosphere standpoint, I think everybody loves going to the last home game of the season for a given team, and I think it'll be fun. I think is the right way to say it. And yeah, whether Arkansas can get it done, I think so, right? I mean, Arkansas is going to be the favorite team, but yeah, like I said, it'll come down to those finer details.
Arkansas is pretty much playing for seeding at this point at the SEC tournament and beyond. It seems like most projections, kind of regardless, have them as a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. I'm not sure. How much do you feel like that can change in the next, whether with this game or with the SEC tournament?
With this game, I think it's kind of a little bit of a wash with regard to NCAA tournament seeding. I don't think that, winning at Missouri or losing at Missouri is going to knock you off that 5 line. For the NCAA tournament, I should say, if you, and I was on the radio the other day and I was asked kind of a similar question, if Arkansas were to say win out, could it get onto the 3 or 4 line? 4 certainly more likely than 3. If you're going to get onto the 3 line, you're going to need to win out and then get a decent amount of help as well, I think. But, I think, if Arkansas wins and gets some other results to go its way, you could see Arkansas maybe start to move into that 4 line, which is really, where you want to be for the preferential seating sites and stuff like that. So that's a big deal. And then with regard to the SEC tournament, obviously Arkansas is locked into that double bye, automatically into the quarterfinal, gets the first 2 days off. But you want to be the 2 seed if possible, and Arkansas, for it to be the 2 seed, needs to win, and it will need Alabama to lose to Auburn at home. And that's a game that Auburn kind of needs as well, kind of a sidetrack. But so there's a lot of different scenarios, but Arkansas got the most important one for the SEC tournament, the double bye, already locked in, and then so this game for those purposes, it's just kind of seeing how high you can go, which is obviously they can be the 2, 3, or 4 seed. And then for the NCAA tournament, I don't think that you're going to be docked a seed line if you lose or raise up a seed line if you win, unless some of those other teams ahead of them lose. So I think that's kind of where that stands. But yeah, with regard to where Arkansas kind of stands with in the NCAA tournament picture, I think they're right on the cusp of that 4 seed, and a lot of it will come down to how Arkansas finishes out the regular season and SEC tournament, and then maybe as well get some help elsewhere.
I want to talk a little bit more SEC tournament, but before that, I want to talk about our friends at Bentonville Glass. They've been serving their community since 1971, and they are committed, professional, and versatile. If you're looking for a quality leader in Northwest Arkansas, and if you're looking for skilled craftsmanship, you can choose Bentonville Glass for all of your glass market needs with the highest quality products. You can visit them at 507 South Main in Bentonville or at bentonvilleglass.com, and we always thank them for their support. Anthony, more SEC tournament talk. Like you said, tomorrow's game is not necessarily going to cost Arkansas NCAA tournament seeding or boost it that much. But as far as the SEC tournament, how much do they need to do at the SEC tournament in order to get up to that 4 line and rather than being at the 5?
Yeah, I mean, you can't just go out there and be one and done, right? And some of that might come down to the opponent, which right now you don't really know what the bracket is going to look like officially. So it's kind of hard to say, one way or another what to expect from that perspective. But if Arkansas is going to be on that 4 line, I think it certainly needs to win at least one game in the SEC tournament, if not maybe 2. And some of it also, like I said, kind of comes down to what happens elsewhere, what happens with Texas Tech, what happens with Vanderbilt, what happens with Team XYZ. So I think some of that kind of comes down to that. Arkansas obviously has a pretty nice resume, has some good wins, but also with I think it's 8 losses right now. That's more than most of those teams ahead of them are going to have at this stage of the season. Or if those teams ahead of them have a similar amount of losses, a lot of those are going to be to take Iowa State, for example. Those losses are coming to Arizona. They're coming to Kansas. They're coming to, Team XYZ. Whereas, some of Arkansas's losses have come to Georgia on the bubble-ish, or, Kentucky's not really up there in the top 16 seed line race, or, whoever it may be. Texas Tech is kind of on that line of, 4 or 5 seed. If those are the 2 teams that, comes down to for the final 4 seed, how much does the committee look at the head-to-head result? How much does it look at Texas Tech no longer having JT Toppin? But if they look at the head-to-head result, how much do they look into Texas Tech not having Luke Van Boy in that game? So there's a lot of different variables that can come into play. But the short answer, as I go back to rambling, I think Arkansas, needs to probably win at least one game at the SEC tournament to give itself a good shot at the 4 seeds. And yeah, I think that's probably the minimum work required for Arkansas to get onto that 4 line.
In some of Arkansas's losses this year, John Calipari has said afterward that he felt like whoever their opponent was, it's happened a few times, but that the opponent just kind of came in more desperate or hungrier or needing a win more, and played that way, and Arkansas wasn't competing the same way. With that in mind, what is Missouri playing for right now in terms of SEC tournament as well as NCAA tournament? What does kind of the outlook look like for them, and what do they need out of this game? Do you think it's possible that they're going to come in, with that desperation that Arkansas might not have at the same level?
Possibly, so the thing with Missouri is, it's still alive for that double bye. It could still slide into that 4 seed. So there's a very real world in which Missouri wins and gets some other results to go its way to get that double bye, which would be very big for, its NCAA tournament prospects as well. And, you mentioned the games. There's 2 games, I think, in particular that Arkansas, John Calipari said coming into them that, the other team was a little bit more desperate, and that's Auburn on the road and Georgia. And I think those are the 2 losses that you're looking at that, aren't, both teams project as at least on the bubble. As much as I don't think Auburn should be on the bubble, it is. That's just the reality of it. And Georgia is solidly probably in the field at this point, but has been kind of bubbly at different times. But, those aren't losses that you really want to take. Even though both were on the road, and then the Kentucky game at home, it's not like any Arkansas doesn't have any bad losses. They're just losses that other teams like on those four lines don't really have at this point in time. Like, I mean, Iowa State lost, I believe, to Cincinnati, which Cincinnati has really turned it around of late. There are some comparable things, but with regard to Missouri, still the double bye is still in play. There's a chance for that, and then it's still Missouri needs to, maybe not needs to, maybe is a little bit strong of a way to put it, but is looking to play itself off the bubble as much as it can. And I think last time I saw a projection, Missouri was last four byes, which means it's at this stage of the season safe-ish, but you don't want to get into a situation where bubble, or I guess bid stealers from like the Mountain West, or even if some team goes on a run and gets hot in the SEC and steals a bid or something like that. You don't want to be in a situation where you're close enough to the bubble where it's like you're kind of starting to shake on Selection Sunday. So there's a lot to play for on the Missouri. I mean, on both ends, but on the Missouri side of it, I think that's what you look at is trying to get the double bye and then also play yourself as much off the bubble as you can.
Before I let you get back to Logboat and enjoying an extra something for me, I think we already talked about Auburn at Alabama having consequences for Arkansas and that being a game to pay attention to. But what other games on this last day of the SEC season are you going to be looking at or think people should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so I mean, look at Texas plays at Oklahoma. Obviously Red River's kind of it's obviously always going to be a big game. Oklahoma is not a tournament team, but Texas is still kind of last four byes. So if Texas goes and loses that game, that becomes a really interesting space for Texas. Florida plays at Kentucky, which is kind of a good game. I guess kind of on paper, Kentucky's trying to play itself into its as good of a tournament seed as it can. It's not going to get a double bye in the SEC tournament, and it's not going to get into the top 16 seeds for the NCAA tournament. But that's still a game where Kentucky is been inconsistent this season and kind of needs a result to kind of boost its own resume, kind of get back off, get some positive momentum going heading into the postseason. Texas A&M's at LSU. That game kind of stinks. But A&M probably in the field if things ended today. Vanderbilt is kind of an interesting one. Vanderbilt, Tennessee is probably the game of the weekend in the SEC. At Knoxville, and obviously it's the in-state rivalry and all that. Tennessee or Vanderbilt, excuse me, has lost 3 of 5, so it's kind of been a little bit of a slide. And still kind of alive for those top 4 seeds in the NCAA tournament. It's not going to get the double bye in the SEC tournament, but it could, in theory, get one of the top 4 seeds in the NCAA tournament. Though I don't think it will. A win against Tennessee in Knoxville would go a long way towards potentially at least giving itself a chance for that. And then you want the stinker of the weekend. It's South Carolina, Ole Miss. Both those teams are hard to watch. No disrespect, but disrespect. I think I honestly probably went through every game of the weekend. So sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a helpful guide. It's a helpful little. Here's what to pay attention to. Here's what not so much to take a look at, unless you just
if
want
you're
to have
watching
basketball
South Carolina versus Ole Miss, you're a sick individual, and I want to be your friend.
I was gonna say that's the kind of thing you would be doing though, so you can't judge too much.
No. That's why I added the caveat. If you're watching that game, you're sick, and I want to be your friend.
You're sick in the same way as Anthony, so take a little bit of comfort in that, maybe.
If you want to know the games I've been watching this week, Michigan versus Iowa last night, didn't even flip it. That's not a lie. Or that is a lie. I did kind of watch it a little bit, but I was watching Arch Madness, the Missouri Valley Tournament. I was watching Evansville versus Northern Iowa last night. I was flipping on Holy Cross versus Lehigh. Come on, that buzzer beater at the end, crazy.
I have a soft spot for Lehigh because that year that they beat Duke, I picked Lehigh. I was one of the select few, and
I feel like
I
you
literally
mentioned
only.
this.
Oh yeah, it's like my biggest like sports win ever. It's the greatest thing I've ever done. Just
That's the
because I
CJ
didn't like
McCollum.
Duke, and so I was like, I don't
Believe you
remember what
about
year
that
that
game.
was. I was not really paying attention to
Oh,
basketball
I
that long.
remember that year.
And what year was it?
I believe it was 2012, if I'm not
2012. So
mistaken.
yeah,
Let me double check that.
I would have
Now
been
I'm invested. I
young
wanted to
enough
figure
that
this
I
out.
was I would have been young enough that I was not really paying attention, and so I would
Yes,
choosing the bracket on vibes, you know.
it was the 2012 year. Lehigh, yeah,
Yeah,
that Lehigh team. The CJ McCollum special. That game was crazy.
I always have
Because
a
that was the
soft
same
spot for them
year.
now.
Not to cut you off, but that was the same year that Missouri lost to Norfolk State. That was a
Oh,
crazy tournament. I remember that. I remember vividly that tournament in particular because I got 3 of the 4 Final Four teams and the national championship and the national champion correct. The one Final Four team that I didn't get was I had Missouri in the Final Four, but it lost to Norfolk State in the first round.
that
And yeah,
is so funny. Yeah, that's memorable. That stands out. Did you win the bracket pool?
yes, I did. I
There
did
you
win
go.
the
I was gonna
bracket
say it
pool.
would
I
have been
won.
hard not to win with that lineup, but
Yes, no, I think I won like $25 or something.
hey,
So,
when you're like, what were we
well,
like
yeah,
13 then? That counts for
13,
something.
14-year-old me was going to the
$25
ice cream
is
shop and
yeah, that's perfect. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the time in our old stomping grounds, and we'll see you back here to get ready for SEC tournament time when you're getting ready to travel out to Nashville for it.
that'll be fun. I booked the hotel today, but yeah, so
Perfect.
good times ahead.
Well,
No,
thanks
thank you again.
everybody. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you have a great weekend, and you can find all of our coverage of the men's basketball game, softball, baseball, gymnastics, everything that's going on campus this weekend. We will have everything you need at wholehogsports.com, and we'll see you next week.